Should be going. Making sure. Taking a second. Everyone take a deep breath. Welcome to the Zoom meeting for the Bend MPO. All right, I think we're going. We should be good.
Okay, thank you, Hovey. And
Mhm.
so I will also say welcome to this meeting of the Bend Metropolitan Planning Organization Budget Committee. Thank you all for taking time out of this lovely sunny day to be here. Let's go ahead and go through and see about a roll call. I see that we have Gregory Bryant with us today.
I'm here.
Excellent. We've got Andrew Davis.
I'm here.
Excellent. Thank you. Janet Greger.
Present.
Thank you. Phil Chang.
Here.
Thank you so much. Brian Potwin.
Here.
And with that,
We also have Don Moore. He just
thank
got
you.
on.
Thank you. Don, want to say hi?
He's just getting on, so it may be a minute to unmute.
That's just fine. And I'm looking to see if we've got either Megan or Rita yet. I understand Rita was going to be here, but a little late, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think, yeah, or she had to leave at 1. One or the other.
Bob Townsend is on as well.
Oh, excellent. Bob, are you here with us?
Yes, I am.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. And let's see, Phil Chang.
Still here.
Oh, I'm sorry. You were already here. Who was it who did? I think that's it. That looks to me like a quorum of the Bend Metropolitan Planning Organization Budget Committee. Does that look right, Hovey?
Yes, I think you've got everybody in their committee role. And if you want, I can go over the rest of them that are here.
That would be great, please, Hovey.
Okay, sure. So I'll just introduce the staff for the MPO. We've got Tyler Deakey, the Bend MPO manager, myself, Hovey Anderson is the program coordinator, and Andrea Napoli, our senior planner for the MPO. And Cameron Prow is our recorder and will be taking our minutes and making sure we are processing these motions and comments correctly. Also on the call, we've got public visitors of Will Green, Karen Swirsky from the City of Bend Growth Management Department. And then for an alternate, David Abbas, if we needed additional assistance for processing this group, is our Streets Transportation and Mobility Director for the City of Bend. And then in our Finance Department, we have the budget manager, Melissa Hodnett, and then a senior financial analyst, if I remember right, as Chris Taylor. And she helped build this budget with me and crunch the numbers.
Excellent. Thank you.
I think that's everybody.
I think so. Excellent. Let's see. So today we are going to review committee assignments. We're going to review and comment on the proposed fiscal year 2021-2022 work program and budget. We'll have a public hearing on the proposed fiscal year 21-22 budget, and then we can make recommendations to the Bend MPO Policy Board as to approve the proposed budget as is or with modifications. I see Cameron's got her hand up. Cameron, have I done something wrong already?
I wouldn't put it that way, but I would say there was a number 2 item on the agenda about visitor comments.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Cameron. Also, I just want to indicate that Megan Perkins just signed in, so she is here now as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right. This is the purpose. And next are we doing public comment today, Ovi?
Yeah, so maybe after this last bullet of make recommendations, we can talk about, oh, go back one slide, Tyler. We can just open it up for any public comment that we may have before we go into any other business.
Excellent. So right now, you mean?
Yep. Right now.
I'm sorry, Obi. Oh, I'm sorry, everyone. All right. So at this time, we will ask if anyone would like to make a public comment. Look for hands.
Yeah, and I'm just seeing that Don Moore, who's a budget committee member, is still working on connecting to audio. So
Okay.
Don, if you do have any comments, looks like you're on now.
I think I was just able to connect. I was having some
Good.
trouble hearing
Okay.
people, so I
Yeah.
used the phone number. So I'm in now.
Great.
Okay, great. Just wanted to make sure. Okay. Just wanted to make sure you didn't have any comments.
I don't see any hands.
Yes.
And if I remember from the agenda, there will also be a public hearing. There it is. And
Yes.
so I think with that, we can go ahead and continue on. So the next item is to assign to go over the Budget Committee citizen member assignments and to choose a chair of this committee. So you can see on the screen, we've got a current Budget Committee roster. We've got Andrew and Janet who are with us for a few more months this year. Then we have 2 new members, which are Greg Bryant and Brian Potwin. So thank you so much for those 2 new members. And then we have Don Moore, who is right there in the middle. Andrew Davis was appointed the Budget Committee Chair in 2020. Is there a consensus for Andrew to continue serving as the chair? I'll just look for nods of heads. It looks like everybody's good with that. And I, in particular, will be more than happy.
We have a comment from Phil.
Oh, sure. Please go right ahead.
If Andrew's term is ending in June, do we need to sort of plan around that right now? Andrew, are you planning to, I'm not actually aware of what the cycles are of Budget Committee member appointments, but Andrew, are you anticipating continuing with the Budget Committee after June, or if we reappoint you, will we just need to do a kind of reconfiguration at the end of June, or what's the, how are things going to flow from here?
Excellent.
I can start that, and then Tyler can fill in any gaps. We do a public application process for our committees, so we would open it up and we would certainly invite Andrew and Janet to apply again if they are interested, but also open it up in case others would like to serve on this committee. We should do it in July, and sometimes like this one we did in January this last season. So depending on our workload, sometimes it gets a little delayed. But Tyler, is there any other processes that you have for updating the Budget Committee?
The only thing I would just mention is that, the appointments are for 3 years. And then we have this, obviously we have a rotating cycle, so we always have some continuity on the committee. And we will, as Hobie mentioned, we'll open up that process, either probably late summer or early fall, and get new, either reappoint Janet and Andrew or try and find new members at that point in time.
Do we have other budget committee meetings scheduled this year?
We do not at this time. If we modified this budget before it was adopted or before July 1st, then we would need to reconvene this budget committee. So it's typically a one meeting, responsibility per year. We haven't ever had to reconvene the budget committee, but there is the potential.
Got it. That was an excellent question, Phil. So what do you think? Shall we just go ahead and stick with Andrew for the rest of this meeting? And then that's great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. So I will be so very happy to turn it over to Andrew at this point.
Thanks, Barb.
You bet.
Hovey, don't let me get out of line because we do this once a year, so I might be a little rusty.
Well, just so you know, we've got most of the slides covered by staff. I think there's 2 or 3 that we'll ask you to serve on. So I'll just give you a heads up when the slide comes up your way. So this next one is all yours. It's the presentation outline. And if you could just go over that, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, so let's just talk for a quick second about what we're going to cover in the next section. So we'll start with, we've got the team will run us through just the background of the Bend MPO and our boundaries. Then we'll look at the work from fiscal year 2021, some of the accomplishments, some of the work in progress. Excuse me if you can hear my dog whining at my feet. Apologies for that. And then we'll move into fiscal 21-22, talk about budget history, issues and opportunities, some future budget uncertainty, which is probably what we've all dealt with every day of the last year, and then major work activities and products. And then we'll look at the proposed budget and some possible reductions if we need to do that scenario planning. Questions about any of that? Perfect.
Right. I'll just move ahead then.
Yeah, and just Phil, if you could put your virtual hand down so that when you do have a comment, we'll get you. Thank you.
And so Andrea Napoli will walk through the next few slides, just the kind of the background information. Andrea, would you like to jump in now?
Yeah, sure. So what is an MPO? An MPO is a federal designation. So we are a federally designated transportation planning entity for the Bend area. And the threshold there is when an urbanized area reaches a population of 50,000, then they would need to form an MPO. This also has density requirements around it. And with the results of the upcoming census, there may be some small adjustments to our boundary. Next slide.
Greg has his hand up.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Great.
Yeah. Am I on? Okay. Yeah. The question is, I know that there might be some extra requirements that just came up that you came up with, the 100,000 people per population. What have you found out about that?
So that hasn't been, that is something that Tyler, do you have any more news on that since you last?
Well, I think just for folks who aren't aware, this information that's on this slide, there's a number of federal entities that are engaged or involved in, not in the MPO process, but in terms of determining what size what constitutes an MPO, what an urbanized area is, and some other things. And there are some proposed rule changes right now from both the Census Bureau and the Office of Management and Budget that would modify that second bullet, and it would potentially change it to a minimum of 100,000. And it would also move away from the 1,000 persons per square mile and move it to a different criterion that the second part of that change probably won't impact us because it's moving away from persons per square mile to housing units per square mile. which I think we'll be fine with. But that greater than 100,000, that's something that's in the proposed rulemaking. It's in the proposal process right now. We don't expect to hear any additional information about that for probably for another 2 or 3 months is my guess at this point.
Now, Tyler, does that include all of the MPO boundaries, or is it just the city of Bend, the 100,000?
100,000 proposal that's out there would be for the city of Bend itself, city of Bend proper.
Okay.
Thanks for that question, Greg.
Yep.
Any other questions on this slide, or otherwise we can move on to the next one? So here is our existing MPO boundary. So as you can see, it's city of Bend, and then includes some of the populated outlying areas: Tumalo, Woodside Ranch, Deschutes River Woods, and Tethrow. Next slide. What is the purpose of the MPO? So the primary purpose is to coordinate transportation planning efforts among the different local jurisdictions for the whole urbanized area. So ODOT, city, county, transit, and then we also receive and distribute some federal transportation funding each year. Next slide. Who funds the MPO? Well, we have federal sources. So we get planning funds from federal planning dollars from federal highways, so FHWA. We also get federal transit planning dollars from the Federal Transit Administration, or FTA. And then also we have federal dollars that come to us in the form of Surface Transportation Block Grant dollars, or what we call Stbg. Our state sources, so ODOT provides us with a match for some of our federal dollars. And we also get in-kind contributions. So in other words, staff time to match some of our federal funds. So for this current fiscal year, some of the key accomplishments and work underway that we have. So there's actually 2 full slides of these. So I'm not going to hit on every single one, but I'll just kind of discuss a few of them. And then certainly if you have questions, just let me know. So we will be doing an amendment to our Metropolitan Transportation Plan. Basically, this will be to incorporate recent planning work outcomes that have happened since our 2019 adoption. We also have created a new funding distribution process for our Stbg dollars. We are currently working on a public participation plan update. And then I know Hovey had put in quite a bit of time working with ODOT research for non-motorized travel activity estimation and crash analysis for the MPO. Next slide. Some other items. So we are beginning to implement the Transportation Safety Action Plan. We have been coordinating with city staff on implementing a multimodal count program. And then, of course, each one of us participates in various transportation-related committees and groups. And then a newer project that's just begun is the Interchange Area Management Plan for an ODOT project for the Baker Road interchange.
Does anybody have any questions about any of these projects on either this slide or the prior slide?
Yeah, since I just hit on just a few of them.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, on the transportation safety plan implementation, I also know I went through that plan, and I noticed there's a lot of information in there that's rather old. And it's like 4 or 5 years old. I was wondering if there's some way that we can increase the timeliness of getting that information.
Well, yeah, Hovey, go ahead. You can
Sure.
speak.
Yeah. We use ODOT crash data, which is usually a couple years out. We just received the 2019 crash data, so we'll be updating those 2 years into that plan. So you'll see some incremental updates to data pieces within that as part of this implementation
Is
strategy.
to Robert, is there some way to get that more timely? I mean, 19, we're 2 years behind the times. I was just wondering. I could see not getting 20. Yeah, I could see. Okay, I could see not having, but because most of the stuff is computerized now.
Yeah, Bob, do you want to talk about, I can discuss a little bit. ODOT uses the crash reports that come in from throughout the state to enter them into a database. And with that process, they are usually about 18 months out before you're able to get the preliminary data, and about 24 months out before you get the final crash data for those years. I know they're trying to improve it, but Bob County may have some more.
I mean, it's really about the crash reports and what the cause of the crashes are. Some of those aren't determined for a couple years after incidents based on police activity or other investigations. And so instead of limiting our data to like, oh, we only have this many, we want complete sets, and that's why there's always a lag. But what happens in project selection or other things, we do have preliminary data that we can use to help make decisions. The example is the Bend Redmond Safety Corridor project was based on safety assessments done from 2012 to 15, and now we're implementing phases. But we go back and look at the priorities and some of the crash reports we have just to justify our decision. So we still use that information. We just have to gather it a little bit differently, and it can't be used for the overall metrics of some of our safety programs because it's not complete.
Okay. Gotcha.
Well, I would just say also, Greg, that the safety data, even though some of the implementation or that data may be done, maybe get submitted electronically to ODOT, they still go through and clean and make sure that every single entry is correct, because there's a lot of times there are errors in the way the data is reported, particularly about location data, that type of thing. And so they have staff that comb through every crash report to make sure that it's entered correct, that all the components of it are entered correctly. And so that there's a part of the delay, I think, is just tied to that data cleaning process.
Okay. Gotcha.
Okay.
Janet?
Yeah.
Yes, I have two questions. One is, could someone just explain a little bit more about the modeling steering committee and what that's all about? And then secondly, the transportation data reporting through COVID-19. I'm just curious if you have any findings yet and how that compares to data pre-COVID.
So the modeling question, Tyler, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I can jump into that. So that is a group. It's a group of folks around the state who coordinate on the transportation modeling work that's done for all of our MPOs and for ODOT, for any of our transportation planning work and our project development work. And this is a committee that was formed probably 20 or 25 years ago, I think, in Oregon. And I think the goal was that at that time, each MPO and ODOT, everybody was starting to use different software programs to do their transportation analysis work. And so the group was formed to say, hey, let's as a small state, let's pool our resources and work together and have a common software package that we use, share our data, and work together so we have the best modeling tools available for all of this, for all of the metropolitan areas in the state and for ODOT to use. And so that committee is still meeting, and I think today the most active, there's a number of subcommittees that are part of that. There's an overall committee that's comprised of, it's a large committee, probably 20 to 25 people from the state. And there's a number of subcommittees that are pretty active today. One of them's focused on climate change and trying to determine if the tools that we use today are sufficient, are adequate to be able to do climate change modeling. And if not, what are we going to do in terms of as working together to come up with new tools to help on doing some of that work that we think is going to be coming. There's a subcommittee that's really focused on technology and trying to wrap their arms around how technology is changing in terms of transportation, what that's going to mean for some of our analysis. And I think the other one that's really starting to get active is around doing transportation survey work at the household level. And we haven't done a major travel survey statewide in over 10 years, and we are gearing up to start that process very soon, with data collection starting in 2022 throughout the state. Does that answer your questions?
Yes, the first one, it does.
Okay, and then Hovey can do the second question.
Hovey, you're muted.
Okay, just had to move Rita in. Welcome, Rita. Rita Schenkelberg, the city councilor, just attended.
Hi, thank you.
Yeah, welcome. We are just getting into our key accomplishments and tasks underway. So Janet Greger, you had a question about how we reported traffic trends through COVID-19. So we've got a traffic count report that we put out every week, or sometimes every other week, that is available online. So I can send a link to this group, but it's under the City of Bend's website. If you look up transportation data, you'll get to that page and you'll be able to look at it. But we did discover that, we track 5 permanent counters that collect vehicle, bike, and pedestrian data. And throughout the years, throughout this year, we've been just measuring, and we're about 20% below what our normal vehicle volumes were. But because these were commuting sections, we kind of had lesser bike and pedestrian activity on those main corridors, because it would be like kids going to school, somebody riding their bike to work, but definitely an increase on the trails and that sort of thing from our Parks and Rec data. So those reports, although they don't show parks data, they do show the trends for vehicle, bike, and pedestrian throughout the COVID-19 period that we've been in this last year. So I'll make sure those get shared out with this group, and I'll put them in the minutes. I'll have Cameron put the link into the meeting summary minutes as well, so that they're available.
I was just going to add.
Yeah, go check them out anytime.
And the thing I was going to add too is that this started last spring. It was shortly, probably a month after everything started to shut down. Local governments, the Deschutes County Public Health Department, City of Bend, St. Charles, a number of folks were interested in saying, hey, are people actually staying home? And so they asked, hey, can you start providing these summaries to us? And so since that time, as Hovey mentioned, she's been generating these reports either weekly or bi-weekly, and has provided them or pushed them out to City of Bend, Deschutes County, St. Charles, and others. And they've also been posted, I think, online. And I think she said that, yeah, volumes are down, but I was going to note, and I think Bob can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think volumes on the ODOT system on Highway 97 especially are back to pre-COVID levels at this point. Volumes are down on city streets, but not on the ODOT system.
That's correct. I mean, there's certain areas in the ODOT system that are down. Metropolitan areas in Portland and stuff are down, but Central Oregon Highway 97 was slightly lower the last year, but not significant, and especially on weekends and as the summer season approaches is pretty normal right now.
Great, thanks, Brian.
Very helpful, thank you.
Yeah, Brian Totman, you have a question as well?
Yes, thank you. I noticed on your previous slide you mentioned Safe Routes to School, and I am curious the MPO's involvement in that program for this last year, and is it involved with the City of Bend's effort to identify key areas around school for construction projects?
Most recently, we've been funding Safe Routes to School projects with this last round of Stbg dollars. The majority did go to Safe Routes to School projects, but can you say your question again? Sorry.
Yeah, just, well, I think you kind of answered it there, but I know that the city of Bend is identifying key areas around schools for construction projects, and I was just curious if the MPO was involved in that process as well.
I haven't been involved in that process. I don't know, Tyler or Hobie, if you have. I think our main involvement has been the city has brought us some of those projects for potential funding.
Yeah, and I think, Brian, our involvement in some of the planning work around, identifying gaps, projects, that type of thing, our involvement we've been kind of in and out of that process for the last decade or more. And Hobie was engaged, many years ago, working with Kim Curley, I think from your staff, on development of some of the school-specific plans that were required at that point in time. We haven't been overly engaged in planning, in the safe routes planning arena in the last couple of years, but I think we will, we can definitely provide that kind of support again if the city or Commute Options, or the school district for that matter, wants some of our support. But I think, as Andrea said, we have, with that 1.3 million shown on this slide, we did dedicate quite a bit of that money to Safe Routes to Schools projects, this year and over the next few years in the Bend area.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions regarding the key accomplishments and tasks underway for the current fiscal year?
All right, I will move ahead then. And so I'll walk through these next few slides. And this is just a budget hit. This slide just shows our funding history from our two primary funding sources, which PL, those are the Federal Highway Administration dollars that we get, and then at 5303, those are Federal Transit Administration dollars that we receive for, to pay for staffing and the work that we do. And you can see that our funding, overall funding, it's gone up and down over the last decade or so. And there were a number of years where I think it was around 2015 or 2016, and as the demands on us continued to grow, our funding was relatively flat for quite a few years. At that point, one of our prior policy boards, opted to start utilizing some of our Stbg funding to help make sure our budget was remained at least level, and started to increase it a bit so we could take on and help support some of the other planning projects underway within the Bend area. And I like to note too, down below there, just showing that our budget has grown over the last decade, but it hasn't kept pace with population growth and employment growth in the Bend area, and just the amount of additional work that has happened or been required of us, particularly around new federal planning requirements, and probably over the next year or two, potentially quite a few new state planning requirements that are coming. Anybody have any questions? Greg?
Yeah, my question is since it's stayed pretty much steady, I mean, it hasn't increased that much except for the last couple of years. What's the basis upon how we get these dollars? And I was just wondering if it starts going down, what are we going to do?
Well, I think two things. To answer your first question, our budget, or the funding, each state DOT gets a lump sum of funding, and then they're tasked with distributing it to the MPOs within their boundary. And we went through a process, I don't know, 7-8 years ago, something like that, where we updated. The MPOs and ODOT went through a lengthy process to update that distribution process. And there's a number, probably 8 or 10 factors that go into that distribution process. And unfortunately, just the way that system is built today, we get the least amount of points, I think, of any of the MPOs in terms of how that process plays out. And we've asked, and Andrea, that's one of the things she'll be working on in the next year. We are requesting that ODOT update that funding distribution process. And so I'm hoping we can step through that, get that updated in the next year or two, with the intention that it would try and get us a little bit more funding. then if our funding goes down, I mean, I just mentioned what happened was, up until about 5 years ago, our only funding in our budget was just from these PL and 5303 funds. At the time when our funding started to decrease, I think it was after in that 2015-16 year, we asked the board at that time then to utilize some of our discretionary money and move some of that into our MPO, into our operating budget. And they did that at that time. They've continued to do so going forward.
Is this an indication of what other MPOs, how much they're getting, or are we just we're on the backside?
Well, I mean, there's probably one of the most important criteria in that distribution process is population, and so our funding amount is probably in line or fairly closely in line with most of the other small MPOs. Some of the other small MPOs do get more than we do because they have additional planning requirements placed upon them that we don't.
Yeah, so Greg, I think I can touch on a couple of these things as examples. So for example, a couple of things that are in that those factors that are taken into consideration when deciding how much is allocated to each MPO, things like how many jurisdictions are within your MPO. For us, there's larger MPOs that have a number of different jurisdictions, multiple cities, counties, and then also do you have any air quality requirements that you have to meet? Here in Bend, we don't, and other MPOs do. But I think one thing that would really help us that's missing from this calculation is that there is no factor for growth rate. There is population, so number of people, but not how fast we're actually growing, which really is the driver of how much work you have to do. So one of the things that I would like to see when discussing, looking at this again, is putting in a growth rate factor into the calculation, and that would really help us.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions on this one before I move on? All right, just a couple of slides here, just talking about some of the changes and opportunities that are ahead of us. Oops. We hired Andrea two years ago, I think. And at that time when we brought her in as a temporary employee, limited duration, part-time, limited duration employee. We increased it at that time. I think she was brought in as a 0.6 FTE. We increased that last year to 0.8 FTE. And through this budgeting process, we're requesting that the budget committee and policy board approve her to be a permanent employee. She would still be part-time at a 0.8 FTE status, but we would like to move her into a permanent status. I think the benefit there is we're able to do quite a bit more work in-house and be more effectively engaged in some of the planning projects that are happening outside of our immediate, outside of the MPO. We have helped fund, and there have been a number of major planning projects have been completed in the MPO area over the last few years. The City of Bend updated its TSP. ODOT's finishing work on a plan for Highway 97. We updated our technology plan. We've helped fund the safety action plan. There's probably a couple other things that I'm missing. And I think the next thing now we want to do is, how do we start implementing those things? There are projects identified. There's some additional studies required or identified in those documents. We want to make sure that we're working with our partners to start actually implementing all these planning efforts that are wrapping up right now. And then I think one of the other big things is we continue to work with ODOT on data collection, storage, and management. And that is a huge issue, not only for us, but just agencies all over the country. We have access to lots and lots of data now, and trying to figure out a way to manage and store that data and be able to utilize it in our planning efforts is a fairly daunting task. And thankfully we've got a pretty strong partner in ODOT, and we're starting to work on that front, and hopefully with the intent that we'll have better planning work going forward. Budget uncertainty. On this one, I'm not sure if it's uncertainty. So I'm not so concerned about the uncertainty at this point in time, but the federal transportation funding comes out. It's allocated usually on a multi-year. Congress usually approves a multi-year bill for transportation. That current transportation, or the most current transportation bill, expired last year. Congress passed a temporary extension, and we've dealt with that issue many, many times in the past, where the main transportation bill will expire and Congress will just do continuing extensions of it. There's a lot of talk right now that the Biden administration is looking at, a major new infrastructure bill, not only transportation, but water, sewer, and some other things. And depending what happens, there's a pretty good chance that something could move on that front during this calendar year. And if we do, just based on the current makeup of Congress, there's a pretty good chance that our funding will either remain stable or increase going forward. The only concern about that is the second bullet down there is that each time a new federal transportation bill is approved by Congress, there's always new requirements put into those bills. And we're fully expecting new requirements would come with this new bill. And not only it's federal level, but there's a lot of work happening in the state of Oregon right now in the state legislative session that I think is going to be, putting additional planning requirements out there for cities and counties, within MPO areas, and we'll be engaged in those efforts too. I think the biggest question for Congress right now is how are they going to fund a new transportation bill? And you can see there that the federal gas tax was last increased in 1993, so it's been almost 30 years, and they've been continuing to fund transportation through probably less than desirable ways. They haven't been, they've been doing a lot of borrowing to make sure that federal transportation funding has remained stable particularly over the last decade. And we know locally that there are funding challenges for some of our MPO partners. There have been over the last few years, and there will probably continue to be in the coming years. And so I think there's going to be a greater reliance upon us, either staff or MPO resources, to help make sure that the planning work that needs to be done within the MPO area can be done. Anybody have any questions about anything on either of these slides? Do you have a question, Greg? Nope, you're muted.
Yeah, what is the federal gas tax? Is it 18 cents a gallon or something like that?
It's between 18 and 19 cents, I think, per gallon.
Okay. And does anybody, do you know that the European gas, their taxes on their gas, if you equate it, and I looked at this a couple of years ago, it's like $4 a gallon. So that's how they're able to support a lot of their transportation. So,
right. All right, I will move on then. And this is just a quick high level, just a quick list of some of our priorities for this coming year. And we will talk about some of these in a little bit more detail as we move through our next few slides. But some of our really high priorities that we've identified in working with the board, our technical advisory committee, for this upcoming fiscal year, mobility hub study. That's something that was identified both in the City of Bend's transportation plan and Cascades East Transit's master plan. And that's looking at developing new mobility hubs, not only in Bend, but throughout Central Oregon, hopefully going forward. Stbg funding process, we just learned a week ago that we are going to be getting some COVID relief funding will come through the MPO. And so we'll be working with our technical committee and policy board to come up with a process for allocating those funds. The Transportation Safety Action Plan, we're working right now on implementing some of the non-infrastructure parts of that plan. And that's really looking at public education and public outreach around some of the issues that we know are primary causes of crashes in the Bend area. And those include, intoxicated driving, speeding, distracted driving, that type of thing. I mentioned earlier the household travel survey, and work on that effort is just getting up and running. That was something that we had planned on having that underway at this point in time, and we delayed it at a state level because of COVID-19. We're going to be helping. We've identified some funding in our draft plan to do some direct planning support for Cascades East Transit with some things that they want help with. And they'll be engaged in the ODOT-led planning efforts mentioned down towards the bottom of the slide there. And I will move on. And I think, Hovey, you've got this next slide. So we'll jump in and just walk through each of the four four main components of our annual work program.
Yeah, so thanks, Tyler. So yeah, our budget is set up in 4 tasks. Task 1 is our program management. It's basically the administrative piece. It is all of our vacation and sick leave and the costs for the beginning working capital and the loan for the general fund are included in this. But if you take out the beginning working capital and the loan for the general fund that's in that table, it's pretty low. So it says it's 44% of our budget, but I wanted to explain a little bit about how that works first, and then I'll talk about task 1. The beginning working capital is what we start with when we start our next fiscal year, and the loan for the general fund is what happens when we get, I guess here, look, I'm sorry, kind of did backwards. Our fiscal year loans are because we're under a reimbursement basis. So what that means is we're about 2 months out for revenue because we haven't invoiced ODOT for our funding to get reimbursed. So it's not necessarily that we are spending $200,000 each year for beginning working capital and a loan, but what it does is it makes it so when we close our books at the end of a fiscal year, we do not have a deficit. So it's basically an overnight loan, and then it's paid back on the first day of the fiscal year so that we have the funding available to continue operations. So that's just an explanation of those $200,000 entries in that table. And then the rest of this funding is split up in between the funding allocations that we get that you heard from Andrea and Tyler as far as the federal highway PL funding you see in there, the FHWA or the FTA transit funding, our in-kind matches and our state match. So these matches are requirements based on the federal funds. A state match in this document is a cash match from ODOT. An in-kind local match is staff time from our local jurisdictions, whether it be somebody in our group that's paid by the city of Bend that helps work on some of our projects, or technical advisory committee members that serve on our committees. Those are how we get our in-kind match. So as you see these next couple slides, you'll see all of these entries in here, and I wanted to give you a backup on that. Greg, do you have a question? Oh, one more mute.
I see the percentages. I was just wondering where do these percentages come from? Is that through ODOT?
Oh, sure. Well, the percent of the total budget is for each task. So that is how, so this is 44% of our entire budget is through task 1. So there's additional percentages down there in the small print as far as in-kind match details.
Okay.
But yeah, so the 44% is just regarding task 1. It shows.
Okay.
So in this task, we develop our budget, we develop our work program, we have our committee coordination with our statewide.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Question I got is there's the percentage of 89.73% is ODOT funds, and then the local funds are 10.27%. I'm just wondering where those percentages come from.
Oh yeah, okay. So those percents are based on the federal allocations. They require a match. So whenever we use those federal funds, 89.73% is the funding that we can spend the 10.27 is the match requirement. So with the state match, that is a cash match to serve that 10.27 that's required for federal funds. The in-kind local match is a staff time match.
Okay. Does that change state year to year, or how does that work?
That has stayed very consistent. So it has not changed. You know, with any federal rules, it could possibly change with the transportation bills that come through, but it has not in the past.
Okay.
So
Greg, those percentages, I'm just going to say those percentages have been in place for at least 20 years, if not longer. So
yeah, we don't anticipate a change, but it has the potential to change as federal legislation changes. So task 1, again, is just overall projects, and then we can go to task 2, and I'll explain this next one, but not in as much detail. I just wanted to make sure you understood those tables that we put on the slides. So this one is a much smaller amount because it doesn't have those loans and beginning working capital. 11.3% of our budget. And task 2, we manage our Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program. We use these funds for tracking our performance measures, our annual federal funding report, which shows how much federal funding for transportation has come into the MPO region in the past year. And that's a federal requirement. And then also managing those discretionary dollars, those Stbg funds that were indicated earlier as part of our work programs, and all the committees that we serve on collectively. Greg, do you have another question? Nope. Okay, just saw your hand up. Wanted to make sure. So is there any questions on what we call our task 2 short range planning section? And with all of these, our work program has each one of these tasks in very much detail, probably about 4 or 5 pages on each task to talk about each specific item. So if we ever have any questions, there is a resource on our website, the work program for the MPO. So we'll move on to task 3, which is our long range planning task. In this is where we would be receiving funding for those mobility hub feasibility study, our Metropolitan Transportation Plan maintenance. This is where our safety action plan implementation project is. And you'll notice down below in the table, there's one called ODOT Safety Funds. That is a grant funded resource to pay for the Transportation Safety Action Plan implementation project. We received that funding from ODOT Safety Division to initiate some of the work that we identified in the safety plan. Barb, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. The mobility hubs feasibility study, would that be studying a specific location to find out if a mobility hub would work at that location? Is that what we mean? Because I feel like we already know that mobility hubs are feasible as a general thing.
I can help with
yeah,
that.
Andrea.
Barb. So the mobility hubs feasibility study, we received a transportation growth management, a TGM grant for that. And that is going to be looking at a number of different factors to decide where best to locate them, what kind of uses should be around them, also who manages what, who owns what. Essentially, we have between CET, the city, and the MPO, we have a lot of questions on how to actually implement these mobility hubs and where they should go. And we hope that this study will answer our questions to get us right up to a pilot project.
So if I heard you correctly, it's a little of both. There is some conceptual, how are we going to manage these interagency questions like that? And then there is some just actual physical, would a mobility hub work in this location or that location? Is that
Yeah,
right?
or what factors should we be looking at and considering when we want to find specific locations? We have the conceptual locations identified.
Oh, okay.
Jumping springing off from there, looking at it at a much in much greater detail to make sure that when we actually implement these, that they are convenient, usable, that people will use them.
Right. Yeah. Great. That's great, Andrea. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. So that next bullet is a Metropolitan Transportation Plan maintenance. That is our 20-year long-range plan. It's required to be updated every 5 years. So we are maintaining it at this time. We updated it in 2019, and we'll have a small update this fiscal year. And then working with our partners to implement many of the projects that have happened in the past couple of years, such as the transportation system plan for the city of Bend, Cascade East Transit Master Plan, and others. So it's really just this is the main bulk of our funding and of our work. So you see the funding levels here are the highest based on these, if we take out that beginning working capital and overnight loan. So any other questions on our long range plan, task 3? Okay, we'll go to task 4, which is more of our transportation demand modeling work and then also our data collection. So Tyler works closely with the state, our ODOT partners who do transportation modeling for this region and determine kind of projections of what kind of transportation levels we will have in the future. That's very data intensive and takes a lot of time and coordination between Tyler and statewide committees and ODOT partners. So that work is here, and then also the household travel survey that we discussed earlier. And then data collection and analysis is something that Tyler and I both work on, but I'm in the weeds on that one. So I work a lot with the safety data and also the transportation data that's available. So Greg? Oh, one more mute. There you are.
Okay, I've got a question on the data collection. I know you got what, 5 locations right now you're using. Are we going to have more locations in the future?
Yeah, there is a potential for that, but it would be a city-led project where the MPO would have support. The MPO is charged through the Federal Highway Administration as being a data warehouse and data analysis area, but the local jurisdictions are charged with collecting the data. So this was one of those synergies from when I used to be 50% a City of Bend employee and 50% an MPO employee. So now we're splitting that off, and David Abbas's group is working on maintaining the data collection system, and I'm charged with analyzing and managing the data that comes out of it.
Okay, David.
Yeah. So yeah. Okay. So there's no plans in the next 2 years to add a new site at this time that we know of, but that doesn't mean that it isn't a possibility.
But there are, I would mention too, Greg, we do work with the city. I mean, there's the 5 permanent count stations, but we also work with the city. The city does temporary counts in May each year.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And so those are collected, I think mid-May. The city, we work with the city and they collect, 20 counts and 20 or 30 sites around the city every May. And so we have that data collection process that we help with as well. And then I would say too that ODOT has, I think in
Permanent
Central
counters.
Oregon, they've got
Yeah.
at least 6 or 7 permanent
Yeah.
counters on Highway 20 and Highway 97, and we're able to access that data as well and see what's happening.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions on transportation modeling? Barb has something.
I just thought of one as far as just curious if any other agencies are counting traffic of any kind. I know the state park has a counter on the base trail. That particular one, I don't think we could possibly sort out who's walking through there in order to commute versus who's just walking around Pilot Butte for exercise. But it made me wonder, maybe Parks and Rec is counting because some of their trails are, you know what I mean? So that's my
Parks
question.
and yeah. So we have a lot of different data collection processes, and they're all in different formats. But we do collaborate with Parks, as well as ODOT has some of those same counters on trails out by the visitor center and that sort of thing. So there is a way to collect all that, and we have it all, but managing it and pushing out the data because they're all in different formats is the challenge at this point.
Of course it is. Thank you.
We're still working on it a little bit at a time.
I think it's the question for our age. How are we going to manage all the data? Yeah, thank you.
And share it in a useful way. So we hope to have some good ways to view the data in a much easier way that we're used to, with clicking and zooming in if we want to see more data, or just seeing a chart as we progress this next year. All right, so with that, we will go to a budget summary. And this is just broken down between how our funding is allocated. So on the left, the resources shows the different funding sources and amounts for each. So in the top left, you see the federal highway planning dollars at 168,000. That's so these are all of our federal funds that come through, federal and state funds that come through. And then in the next section below that would be the match requirements for each one of those funds. So they align. So you see the 168,700 is the federal planning share, and then the state match is the 19,000. And then, so on. So just so you know how that's broken down. And then you'll see the budget resources add up. And then on the right is the appropriations, how we split out the expenditures for these. So you'll see task 1, 2, 3, and 4 that we just went over, and which funding levels for each task are identified. Small print there talks about what we talked about before, was the 10.27 match requirement for each federal fund and how that all works. And then that bottom one talks about where in the line item budget you can find all of these match dollars and funding resources. Greg, you have a question? Oh, mute.
The question I got is, in your commentary that I was reading through, you said that we are the only small MPO that uses Stbg for operating purposes.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
Is that correct? And I was just wondering, what do the other ones do from a funding standpoint?
Well,
or are they just smaller than we are, or something like that?
They're much. I mean, I would say if you look at the, Corvallis and Albany and Grants Pass are all quite a bit smaller than we are, and I know Corvallis and Albany, for instance, they only have one person, and that person isn't even quite full time. They're housed within a regional government over in the Mid Valley there, and those folks work. They're 0.8 or it's a 0.8 or 0.9 FTE kind of position for the MPO, and that's kind of all they got.
Okay.
And we functioned like that a long time ago, but I think just given the growth issues and the demand, that we've seen around planning, our board has made the decision, at least in the past, to better fund us to make sure that we're doing all the things that we should be doing and meeting, the demands of the community.
Okay. All right.
And I would say the 3 large MPOs, so the Salem, Eugene, and Portland, they have been doing that. They've been allocating, a percentage of their Stbg funding for their operating budget for a long, long time.
Okay. All right.
I muted myself. Any other questions on this slide? All right, we'll go to the next one, which is just an excerpt of our budget line item detail. And we may want to pull up the actual line item detail if we have any questions, but this just shows some of the breakouts. So you'll see in the top there, all of the federal funding is lumped into one line, 539,000. So you want to just, so that's why having that budget summary that we just went over is helpful to see where all these funds actually come from. And then you'll see the state cash match and in-kind match from, it's Bend and Deschutes County in-kind match. Because of the safety action plan is a coordinated effort with Deschutes County, we use some of the road directors' time and that sort of thing as an in-kind match for that grant. So just a plug for coordinating and collaborating with our partners there with the city and the county. And then we can go into expenditure details. For personnel services, I just zipped it up there, but in the detailed line item in the budget document, you can see all of the personnel services, basically the employee costs. And then I kept the materials and services expanded so we could look at that in detail if anyone has any questions about any of these funding levels or details, what these mean. So Janet, you have a question?
Yeah, I'm just curious. I noticed the budgeted amount for the current year for legal services is 2,500, and you're expecting to use 5,000. So I guess you're proposing 5,000 for next year. And I just wondered why it jumped so much in one year.
Oh, sure. Yeah, we typically don't use our legal services to the resource that we budgeted, but our contract that we have with our legal services agent, which is, I just lost his name, Tyler, if you could help me. It's Pete Christoph. And so we have a contract that is up to $5,000. So I wanted to match our budget with the contract. We typically, there are times when we do heavily rely on our legal services, and having a retainer of $5,000 would be for any funding issues or anything that we need help with. That will give us the authority to use those funds if we need them. So it's really just a savings, savings account to make sure I don't anticipate using all 5,000.
Okay, thanks.
Greg? Oh, unmute.
Is pertaining to the ranges of your salaries. Where do those come from?
Those come from the employee personnel services. There's my position is through the City of Bend Employee Association, so that those ranges come through that association. And then the non-represented employees, which are Tyler and Andrea, come from the processes through that City of Bend allocation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, they have to come from somewhere for Bend, but okay, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so it's based on City of Bend positions.
Okay,
So we are,
do we have the financial people from Bend that could tell me that or not?
Absolutely, yeah. We do have both of those employee ranges are online, and Chris Taylor can talk about where we can find those.
Yes, they're in the budget document as well, but the salary ranges are for like positions in those same classifications for the City of Bend employees. Our HR department does classification studies that compares with other jurisdictions for comparable work to make sure that we are paying appropriate salaries. And so the positions are put in at those salary scales, and they follow the salary scales that are produced by the City of Bend.
All right.
And if I could just jump in, I'm sorry, I was having some technical difficulties. I couldn't get the Zoom screen to pop up. If you go to the City of Bend website, you can actually just literally Google City of Bend salary schedule, and you can find all of our salary schedules for all of our different bargaining units and also for non-representatives. So we have, just so we're being kind of consistent across, all of the bargaining units have their own salary schedules, and then the non-reps will have one too. And then those ranges are basically, you can be paid anywhere within that range, but every year we would do some kind of cost of living adjustment to the whole schedule. So all the ranges move at the same rate.
All right, very good. All right.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Chris.
Janet, I see your hand is up.
Nope.
No, sorry. Sorry.
All right. Are there any other questions? Or Barb has one. There you are. Sorry, Barb.
It's all right. Thank you. As Melissa just demonstrated for us, we use the budget department of the state, City of Bend. So I'm curious about the legal services as well. Are we able to take advantage of the city's legal department?
We went through a process, and we used to use the legal service through the city, but because we're a separate entity, we were recommended by the City of Bend Legal Services to get our own legal representation, since we are a separate entity, even though we work within the Bend, the Bend City. So we took that, and about 3 years ago, created our own legal contract. So that's where that changed.
Okay, thank you.
And then let's see. And the only other one that, we touch on quite a lot is the interagency transfers. Those are our transfer funds. It shows, sorry, my eyes are bugging. I think it's 63,000 for transfers. And those are our overhead costs for facilities, IT, finance, and our contracting services, the purchasing within the City of Bend. So those were increased, but they also represent an additional employee that wasn't represented in the last budget. Those numbers get updated every 2 years along with the city's biennial budget. Any other comments or questions on the line item detail? Or Tyler, do you have anything extra to add on that?
No, I mean, just unless anybody has any questions about specific items.
I'd be happy to answer.
Yeah, the detailed line item, if you have the actual budget document in front of you, is on page 17. So you can look across multiple years and see what's happened, with these different items.
Yeah, and right before the line item detail in the budget, you'll also see an explanation of what those lines mean. And if there's any significant changes, I try to address those in that narrative. So with that, we can go on to the next slide, which is our work program and budget schedule. And I'll have Andrea to address this one.
Yeah, I can speak to this one. So kind of what we've done, where we are now for our annual work program. So in February, we reviewed that document with our federal partners and ODOT. And late February, we posted the draft annual work program document to our website. Also, the document went for review with our TAC and our policy board in February. Today, we have our budget committee meeting. And then on April 20th, we'll go back to our policy board for adoption of the annual work program and budget. Any questions on the process there, timing? Okay, next slide. So at this point, you know, the action is review and comment on our budget and holding a public hearing on the proposed budget and making a recommendation to the policy board.
Yeah, so Andrew, I think we'll have you jump back in.
Absolutely. Sorry, I couldn't find my mute button that time. Okay, so do we have someone who's willing to make a motion for us so that we can move forward on this, adopting this budget?
I think, Andrew, I think you first need to hold a public hearing.
Oh, sorry. See, I knew I was going to mess this up. I told you guys to keep me in line.
It's all right.
Okay. Remind me the mechanics of what do we need to do to hold that public hearing? Do we need to just give open space for?
Yeah, I think you just need to open it, you know,
okay.
And ask if there's any comments and then close it.
Okay, then let's do that. So let's go ahead and open that public hearing. And then I see a hand from Janet. Janet, do you have a question?
I know, I was just raising my hand to make the motion, so I'm jumping ahead too.
Thank you. Okay, do we have any comments now that our public hearing is open?
I see no hand raises or indications.
Oh, it looks like we've got one from Will Green.
Yes.
Hi, I don't know if my video is working, but I don't know if this has a budget, it reflects necessarily on the budget, but I'm curious if there are any line items specifically around, you know, we're talking a lot about data and connecting data sources and having a better way to access, sort, process, visualize all of the, you know, various, you know, file formats and, you know, data streams that we're getting. I'm interested if you guys have, you know, allocations for reaching out to, you know, local community colleges and, you know, the Cascades branch of OSU and, you know, working with them in any sort of partnership capacity to help, you know, alleviate some of that budget strain for return, you know, volunteer work and, you know, access to work on, you know, real world government projects. And if that's something that you guys already sort of do as far as engagement, and then whether or not there's any sort of budget allocation that would go towards that sort of outreach and development of a partnership of any kind. Also, of course, what kind of government and legal stipulations are there in terms of having that type of partnership and connection built within the city?
Yeah, I can answer a little bit of that. Thank you, Will.
Yeah.
So we have worked with OSU Cascades with Casey Berg on some other test projects. So I don't think this would be something out of line for us to consider in the next fiscal year. I don't think it has any budget implications, but it would be a work program addition. So I do think this is an appropriate place to consider that. Tyler, you might have another comment.
Yeah, I would say that, yeah, as Hobie mentioned, we have worked with OSU Cascades in the past a little bit. And I think we, MPO and working with city, we've talked with OSU about other potential partnerships. And there was some work and then it just kind of fell away. I mean, for lack of a better way to describe it. And I think it's something that you raising it again, you know, I appreciate that. And I think it's something that we can work on, you know, going forward, is to look at what are the partnership opportunities that we have. as you mentioned. I don't know if that's an adequate answer, but I think it's something that we can
No,
definitely look to in the future.
No, I think that's a very valid response. And as these types of relationships go, I've been part of many in my past schooling education, experience. Things can start out pretty excited and then sort of fizzle a little bit. But yeah, I mean, it's just again, I'm a new resident of Bend as of last year, and so I'm just trying to get my bearings on how the city's operating and all the different organizations around. And so just thought I'd throw that comment out there. But yeah, definitely interested to talk more about that in future meetings and discussions. But thanks for the response.
Yeah, and I'd like to add, Will, thank you for your comment. We really appreciate it. We do have representatives from both OSU Cascades and COIC on our technical advisory committee. So they help, steer the work of the NPO.
Great, thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments during our public hearing portion of the meeting?
I see no other hands up.
Perfect. So I think we can go ahead and close that portion of today's agenda and now move on to looking for a recommendation to the BMPO for policy board to approve the proposed budget, either as is or with modifications. Janet, I know you were raising your hand earlier.
Yes, so it looks like that no amendments were made to the budget or revisions. So it looks like we can make a motion for the budget as presented. But first, I just wanted to also mention that I serve on the board of Commute Options, and Brian Potward is now on the budget committee, which is also, I think, another partnership that MPO could pursue down the road. So I just wanted to put that out there. And now on to the motion. I move approval and recommend MPO Policy Board adoption of the proposed fiscal year 2021 to 2022 Bend MPO budget as presented.
Excellent. Thank you, Janet.
I second it.
Perfect. Thank you, Greg. Any further questions or comments? Good. Hearing none. Hovey, do you want us to vote, or is consensus sufficient for the needs of this? I think you just muted yourself.
I did. Yeah. I was trying to unmute myself. I think a raised hand is fine for this process. If everybody approves this budget.
Everybody would just signify for us.
2, 3. I see everybody on there. So thank you. Yes.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone.
All right. And moving on to the next slide, which is thank you very much for your time, all your consideration, all your comments, and helping build this budget with us. We appreciate every comment that we receive and the collaboration throughout the year as well. This budget will be posted online, and there'll be another public notice as far as additional comments can be received at the policy board meeting or in the interim through an email to any of our staff. And Tyler, do you have anything else you want to add when closing?
I don't. Do you, Andre, do you have anything?
No, I don't, except thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I'd like to add my thanks as well. Thank you, everybody on the budget committee. Thanks for your time and your comments and questions. We really appreciate it.
Thank you to all the staff. So great work.
Yeah, yeah. They make
Yes,
things.
thanks, everyone.
Don't they, Janet?
All right. Thank you all.
To adjourn.
Yeah, we
Have a
didn't
good
put
day,
that on the slide.
everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Thank you so much.